Hello, this video will cover the next portion of the ProLearn Autograding Questions documentation, which will be focusing on the Autograding C programming questions section of the documentation, which is pages 9 through 13. Alright, so continuing to talk about autograding and how to autograde different types of questions, we will focus on autograding a different type of question, which are C programming questions. So, for example, for homework 4, question 4, it asks the students to complete a function called max consecutive ones, where it returns the maximum number of consecutive ones in an argument that's passed to the function. And so the students will uh, write the definition for this function in a given file editor, and then we need an autograder to be able to take that code and test it and make sure that the output of this function matches the kind of expected output. And so kind of setting up this autograder, what we first need to do, or what first needs to be done, is to modify the info.json file for this question. And so what you're first going to do is you want to change the grading method and set it from internal to external, because we are going to kind of create our own custom grading script for this question. And for all C programming questions, this is what you're going to do. And so by default, the grading method will be internal. And that doesn't have to be declared within the info.json file. So like for your text box and your multiple choice drag and drop type questions, that grading method, or the grading method for those questions, will be internal, because it'll just use ProLearn's own kind of default grading script. And for what we want to do, we're going to have to make a custom grading script to then be able to make tests to actually go through the student's code. And so since we're using an external grading method, we then need to kind of we need to configure that external grading method. So then we have to kind of set these external grading options where we enable external grading. We declare what the image, the autograder image, is going to be, which is called ProLearn C, which is kind of a built-in ProLearn autograder. We then need to define kind of the timeout. So here the timeout is set to be 100 seconds. So if it takes 100 plus seconds for ProLearn to pull in this image here, then it will stop pulling it and it'll just time out and not grade the question. And then lastly, we have to define the entry point of the autograder and like what's actually gonna be running the autograder. And that's defined by this test.py file in the tests subdirectory. And so kind of looking at that subdirectory a little bit more. So here's the test subdirectory where for this question it has two files, main.c and test.py. And so test.py is, as kind of mentioned before, this is the file that's kind of running the configuration for the autograder, where first it's taking the student code. And so here, the file that they're writing is in this student.c file. And so we will be compiling that file, so compiling the student's code. And we want to have this extra parameter here where we also add in the main.c file and compile that, because the main.c file will actually be taking in that max consecutive ones function that the students are modifying, or that they've modified and submitted. And then down below in its main function, it's actually going to be running tests on that student's code. So specifically this line, it's taking the student's function that they've defined, and it's going to give it about 5 different parameters, and it's going to check to see then if the output of their function matches kind of the expected result. And this ANDS function here is actually going to calculate the correct answer, and and the output of this function is the correct answer. And so it's going to make sure that the student's function code, that its output matches this. Because if it does, then that means the student's code is right. And then if it doesn't, then that means there's a bug in the student's code and it's not fully correct. And if the student's code, if their output matches the expected output, then we'll print here that test 1 or test 2 or test 3 passed. And then if their output doesn't match the expected output, then we'll say, oh, then this test 1, test 2, test 3 failed. And it's super important that we do print if the test passed or failed, because going to the next line in the test.py file, it's actually going to run the test. So it's going to execute the student's code, so their function here, and it's going to be checking the output of main.c. So it's going to be looking to see, okay, did those 5 tests pass, or was there one test that failed? And so this next parameter here is saying that all outputs are that the expected output has to be matching, so that each test here needs to pass, and it has to match exactly this, where test 1 passes, test 2 passes, all the way up to test 5. All those tests pass. And if all the tests do pass, then that means that the student code works and that they get full points. It's either they get full points, or if one test fails, then they get no points. And so kind of demonstrating that functionality here, just quickly pasting in the correct solution, where it will return the maximum number of ones based off the parameter x here. If I save and grade this, it does return 100%. So it does. So see here, it's expecting that all 5 tests pass, and the output here is that all 5 tests did pass with this code that I just copied in. And because all 5 tests passed, then that means that I got a 100% score. But if I modify this code here, and let's say instead of checking bit 0, we check bit 2. And so I then submit this code, and now it's saying, that I didn't get a good grade because the code is incorrect. So once again, it's expecting all 5 tests have passed, but the resulting output is that only test 4 passed. And tests 1, 2, 3, and 5 didn't pass. And so because 4 out of the 5 tests didn't pass, I didn't get a score at all, or I got a score of 0. And so this kind of process is what you're going to follow for C programming questions, where you're going to have to modify the info.json file to use external grading, and then you're going to use this test.py file to compile the student's code, and then look for outputs from the main.c file and say, if all these tests pass, then the student's code works and that they get full points. And then your main.c file is what's actually going to be taking in the student's code, running it and comparing it to the expected output and running those tests.